So, welcome everybody. This evening we're going to be looking at Pathwork lecture number 235, The Anatomy of Contraction. And this was delivered on November 19th, 1975, one of the later lectures. And a kind of good summary. He refers to earlier lectures, of course, but I felt like this had, a good message. And then I was also feeling like in some ways the class that had just completed the dying into life process, was going through this kind of pulsation, right? That I think is so important to understand. So let's continue. He says, "Greetings and blessings, my very dearest friends. Love and truth envelops all of you here in this room. May this lecture tonight, in spite of the human obstacles, help you to realize more and more of your innermost being and to actualize it." So the path is a spiral movement. You know this. You have heard this and experienced it. Each round of the spiral is a new layer, and at the entrance of each round, a new and deeper commitment needs to be made. The rounds or circles are not closed. They have openings. As you discover a new opening, you need to make a new commitment on a yet deeper level. To let go and to let God, to give all of yourself to the truth of being, to no longer hide from your truth. This truth can have many different facets. It is up to you to find which particular inner condition you are called upon to face and to alter if necessary. Each entrance to a circle represents such a phase of renewal of commitment on a deeper level. Often, you do not know which particular aspect of your personality your inner organic path calls you to deal with. As long as you grope, perhaps without even knowing it, you will feel beclouded and your life will seem to contract into a crisis. This is a period of testing that gives you the opportunity to find what it is you need to know, see, and change, where a new commitment needs to be made. Without the momentary darkening, you may never feel motivated to undertake the necessary search. The moment you find and understand the meaning of this period, this phase on your path, and experience it as a meaningful piece that fits into the whole picture, you have passed the test, and you have information available from your innermost being. You will be able to make the commitment specifically where and how it needs to be made, so as to shed old bad habits of thinking, feeling, reacting, willing, and being. In that moment, you have entered a new round on your spiral, and you find yourself on a deeper circular motion, leading to the treasure of your inner universe. On the outermost level of the spiral configuration, let me pause here for a second. Is there any comments or questions in this first sort of opening here? I always like sort of the metaphysical, sorts of generalized, you know, ways that he talks about these things, and then he brings it into the psychological, right? And then sort of back out, and there's this way that I've been sensing, this pulsation movement that he's talking about in this circular, development in many different ways. It's like, I think it's maybe like an essential element of the universe in some sense, this movement of expansion and contraction, of moving out into life and coming back, whether it's the breath, whether it's the actual, each life is kind of like that, a moving out and then a returning, into union, from union into individuation and back into union. So there's this thing that he's speaking here of, that's even bigger than just how we usually think of contraction, right? So he says on the outermost level of the spiral configuration, we experience life as disconnected. So we move out and expand out so far that he's spoken of this before, we lose our sense of connectedness to the whole. And occurrences seem to have no meaning, and everything seems arbitrary. And you may feel occasional happiness and fulfillment or gratification of your desires, yet this never relieves the inner anxiety that you are a helpless straw in the wind, living in a world without rhyme or reason. Fulfillment comes to you as haphazardly as tragedies and crises, or so it seems to you. At this stage in your consciousness, you are so far removed in your consciousness from inner causes that you experience the effects as chaotic coincidences. This is the reason why, even if you do have your desires fulfilled, even if you live in health and material security, you feel much less secure and much more frightened than when you have reached deeper circles on the spiral of growing consciousness and go through a period of confusion, darkness, or crisis. Then you may already understand the meaning of this period and therefore feel a deep security in the meaningfulness of it all. Isn't that interesting, right? Do you follow that?
Yeah,
So,
that is interesting.
yeah. So happiness that appears to be random contains no security. In that state, you always fear to lose the happiness. And when you lose it, the loss, like the previous happy state, has no meaning or connection with a deeper sense of life. So as you progress into deeper levels on the spiral and enter into new commitments to your God and to your truth, little by little, you see that there is meaning in the daily occurrences. And this is where, like sometimes we see it and sometimes we don't. We go through periods of time where certain things are clear and other things are more obscure. But that there is beginning to, be developed this, realization that, there is meaning in, what we're experiencing, and like life is mirroring or reflecting back to us, something that we might want to pay attention to. You find connections that give an intrinsic sense to your life. As you perceive this in this very practical matters in your life, then cosmic reality opens up to you. So this seems really true to me as well. That as we make these connections and that, we begin to sense this intrinsic sense and meaning to everything in life, and in our life specifically, right? Then it seems to open up cosmic reality, right? We begin to sense we're part of something bigger, that there's something leading us, something guiding us, something helping us, something challenging us, right? And maybe it's an aspect of our own self, perhaps, it's not to say what it is, but it's something beyond our little ego, personality, physical being going through this earth walk. And I think this is something that we're hungry for, right? Like there's a shift that comes, when we can realize that, these that life is sort of more than just the mundane. But there is a deep level of consciousness, of evolution, of spirituality that is, happening in all of this. So further deeper layers of the spiral rounds then take on a light and an experience of bliss that cannot exist unless you make the forever renewed commitments about specific issues on the new levels. And so like in some ways, right, there is, as we keep going through these sort of places where it feels like there's contraction or there's difficulty or there's challenge, and everything that we come out the other side and we realize, that it has this deeper understanding and meaning, and as we do that more and more times, and the faith in that process grows, then as we enter into the next experience that seems challenging, there's something inside of us that recognizes it and kind of holds us a little more firmly, and gives us a little more faith, and we begin to recognize, oh, this is where I am in the journey, right? And this is what it requires, right? And we begin to navigate in a way, as the guide promised sort of in that very first lecture, our little boat on the sea of life, right? So when you arrive at a new entrance on the spiral, it seems often difficult and fraught with tests. Yet the tests are necessary. Without them, you cannot find the deeper meaning of everything that happens in your life, personally and generally. As you see the meaning, so does your security increase. So he's now going to go deeper into this anatomy of contraction. Is there any comment on this intro part that we just covered? Do you want to add anything, throw anything more out?
It's just that as you're reading it, it is the purpose of my life. I mean, it gives a deep, profound purpose and a spiritual purpose. So
you resonate and recognize and align with what he's saying.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. Without it, I'd be, just crashing left and right in daily life. It would be very painful and very uncomfortable.
Good. Okay. So yeah, I'm with you there, directly in my own life. I apply this all the time, and it has, grown in this way, like more and more I read the lectures, and at first I would, like vaguely understand what he was saying, and now it seems like, yeah, he's describing exactly my experience, right? So definitely seems to take its time, right? I've been working with this path since 1984, and yet, it's like that sense of our own development, our own growth that he talks about in Real and False Needs, is so palpable, and so grateful. I guess we're getting close to Thanksgiving, for having, found this path. So he starts on the anatomy of contraction. Many years ago, in your earthly time dimension, I gave a lecture about the principles of expansion, contraction, and what I called the static principle. So I suggest that we could reread that again. It says, I will specifically concentrate on the principle of contraction because there is so much misunderstanding, so many misconceptions about this principle in your world of duality. You imagine that contraction is negative, bad, while expansion is positive and good. I mean, I think there is a certain level that this is true, right? Like when I think of, my energy body, and when I'm tense, and contracted, that doesn't feel as good as when I'm, relaxed and expanded. So, on, sort of a very fundamental sort of energetic physical level, but this is a certain type of contraction, right? And he's talking here about a different force of contraction. So, and again, he says, well, this may be true on certain levels. It is not true in itself. There is a specific spiral configuration that applies to the development of your soul in this respect. In the very early stages of the development of human consciousness, the states of expansion and contraction are both equally painful and negative. As the soul begins to evolve and grow, it enters a new spiral phase around On that level, expansion may become positive and contraction negative. Gradually, the movement changes again and on a different level, or even simultaneously. This can be reversed. Expansion can then have a negative manifestation and contraction, a positive one. Can you imagine that? I mean, does that make sense?
That does get a little bit cloudy.
You know, the example that comes to my mind is like, and I think he kind of uses this, you know, like I mean, if you're active and partying and out there, and then like there's this other place of sort of quiet and internal and still inside, that is not that negative contraction. It's a positive one of wanting to connect with your center, your still inner being, or something like that, right?
When you put it that way, it makes a lot of sense.
So and I know sometimes, when I get expanded in a way that's ungrounded, right? And doesn't always work so well and around other people, and affects other people in a negative way, and then eventually, you know, the situation. So yeah, so I think it can be, both. And then there's this way I think that, like, even this time of year, right? It's like it's a part of the natural cycles of the earth, right? And so if we can flow with those cycles, right? Spring is the time and summer is the time of expansion, and fall and winter is the time of ingathering and contraction, in the flow of nature, in the yin and yang of the you know Tao. So he says, you do understand quite clearly that in the positive manifestation of expansion, the outgoing movement is reaching, giving, making yourself available for further beautiful states of consciousness. It is a highly volatile creative expression. It is active and aggressive in the best sense of the word. It means penetrating into new realms of being, giving forth from the inner riches, and eliminating walls of separation. It implies courage and strength. It is an active force that propels itself outward. On the universal level, it is the force that penetrates and enlivens the void. So that's the positive expansion. Right? So what would be the negative facets of expansion? When expansion manifests as negative aggression, as a hostile conquering force that disregards others, it creates more separation rather than less, and thus contrasts with positive expansion. So once again, where the result is in separation, right? We can detect the evidence of the lower self, right, which will have negative effects. So contraction is negative when there is a tight holding back, a cramp, a refusal to flow and give out. This form is very familiar to you. It is a seeking of safety through isolation and separateness. It is a movement reaching inward that is motivated by fear, distrust, ungivingness, and false ideas about what is safe and what is not safe. It contains itself in one's own inner world, but not for the purpose of bringing out the riches of the inner world so as to spread them out, as is the case with positive contraction, but rather in a refusal to move, reach, love, trust, and give out. So feel pretty clear the differences in these, as usual. I love the way that he, takes each aspect of something and shows the distortion and divinity on, on both sides, right? Whereas we usually think, oh, it's this duality of expansion and contraction, and one is good and one is bad. But what he always does is shows us how there's good and bad on both sides, right? And it has to be a little more subtle than that, and we have to recognize the element of the lower self and the separation, where there's the negative, and then recognize also that sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's beautiful, sometimes it's exactly what we need. And especially like where our mind, our ISI, judges, oh, we should be out there doing something more right now or something like that. It's often off, right? Because the natural, flow of the being is moving into an indwelling process, right? Into a time where it needs to be within itself. So, we're trying to listen deeply to these movements within us, and be exploratory, at least. Okay, so I don't know if this is, maybe it is, I'm just being lazy, but let me go ahead and just give in and rest and just be for a while and see what happens, right? I can always you know motivate myself, or use my will to activate myself somehow. And it's really trying to listen to something deeper than outer will, but this inner movement, that is a pulsation that really is what makes life, like most fruitful and comfortable, most self-supporting. So you see, my friends, two movements are involved here. The expanding outgoing movement brings out what has been collected and ripened in the positive contracted state. And the positive contracted state means bringing to fruition what has been gathered in. It is a renewed delving into the deepest layers of divinity. In this state, that which was brought into the soul during the expansive period merges with what is ready to come out next. It is a meeting of two movements within the soul, simultaneously digesting and assimilating the former period and preparing the following one. The ingathering movement in its positive manifestation bears no resemblance to the negative contraction. There is no fear or distrust, no ungivingness. There is no false safety measures. It contains much rather a love, just as pure as does the positive expansion. It is a going into the self for the purpose of serving the universal creative process harmoniously and bringing it to fruition. Could this possibly be designated as negative? So does that make sense, that there's this movement of love in this process, right? That makes it not resemble, the negative contraction.
Yeah, it's a curious word. You're saying a negative contraction is positive. I'm not sure why the guide would use the word negative there.
Where are you speaking? So seeing that, you lost me.
Well, I mean, he's saying there's a, well,
He says that,
maybe I got that wrong. Maybe it's a
right,
positive.
right,
The word contraction
right. The
feels
contraction
negative,
is
right?
usually thought of as negative, but
Right, right.
yeah.
I got it.
Yeah, and it is, sort of unconsciously, so it is like kind of, he's stretching our minds there and helping us understand, and it goes back again to a lot of his other lectures on sort of the receptive and the active and the masculine, the feminine, and these other things as well. But it also speaks, I think, deeply to just this natural flow. And I think a part of what we're beginning to do with all of this work, right, is be in touch with this universal current, and when we are, in that flow more fully, and accepting, when it's time to wait and contract and gather in, or when it's, or listen to, like we need to move, there's action that, but we don't know, how to bring it forth. Like it's a kind of study that we're And I think especially in this time of kind of COVID and transformation and change, right? Like the way out will be listening into these deeper movements of the soul rather than superimposing our mental ideas on what we should be doing. So he says it is a going into the self for the purpose of serving the universal creative process harmoniously and bringing it to fruition. In positive contraction, you gather from without, like a wave that rolls back into itself, so as to reach in and bring out, only to move outward again. This is the ever-present pulsation of life to be found in all creation, in every creative process. Nothing can be created without the threefold interaction of the expanding, contracting, and static principles, be it a small object of the simplest form or the creation of worlds and universes, material or spiritual realities. Of course, it is all one universe, without as within. But the movement must make the exchange. From the human vantage point, the inner universe offers different kinds of riches and states than the outer. The inner universe offers the material that has to be utilized and brought out into the outer universe, so that the outer universe can be given form. The outer universe only repeats what exists in the inner universe, in an as yet undifferentiated form. Then the outer universe recreates itself, duplicates the inner forces and the manifestations of the inner universe, and brings back these forces to nourish the inner. Thus the inner and outer universes nourish each other back and forth. So it reminds me of that figure eight with the, I don't know, it's like it's also twisted or something. There's, ultimate, dimensionality or something like that. And also just that, eternal, connection between the material and the spiritual universes that are sort of in our, going through our chakra systems, right? And so as you know, there must be a momentary pause between every alteration of expansion and contraction. And you might just kind of pay attention to this a little bit, in an experiential, with your breath, right? We don't usually like kind of just, breathe without a pause. Maybe a pause on the inhale, maybe a pause on the exhale, maybe on both. But actually breath work is, something that we talk about, okay, leave out the pauses, right? Like a continuous circular breath, right, without the pauses. And that, increases the amount of the, breathing and oxygenation, that allows sort of the altered states that happen in breath work. So in our natural, just breathing rhythm, usually we have these pauses, right? And it's good to enter into that pause, into that in-between place, into that stillness and silence in between. We call it the static principle for lack of a better word. Static must not be thought of in the sense of stagnation. It is static rather in the sense of allowing to rest, allowing the process to ripen, so that after each contraction, that restful ripening phase must set in. This threefold principle exists in every phase of creation. Creation is unthinkable without all three aspects. Yet in your consciousness you associate the expanding principle with the creative movement while you perceive the contracting principle as destructive. You ignore the existence and importance of the static principle. This is a mistake. So your mind becomes fixed and closed to the truth. When the contracting principle expresses itself, you judge yourself according to your preconceived idea that contraction is something undesirable and bad and should not be allowed. Consequently, you prevent yourself from going through the total creative movement in a state of loving comprehension, welcoming what unfolds, going with it, aiding it with your mind and will. So I think this is very important what he's saying here. Like in some ways, when we recognize that we're in a contracted state, very often we think, oh, something's wrong. What's wrong with me? And this is kind of like a vicious circle then that like creates a contraction around the contraction. And this is ultimately sort of I think what happens in depression, right? Like we go into this kind of contracted state and then we judge that contracted state, or we're frustrated in that contracted state, or we think something is wrong and we should be somehow other than how we are, right? And so a lot of times a huge freedom happens when one can allow oneself just to be contracted. And I know from, in times when that helped my depression, and still does, like when I get little mini depressions of, like short duration, even, less than a few minutes sometimes, but, at most hours, but can feel kind of, contracted places in the side of myself and my own frustration or unhappiness with that, like the minute that I can recognize, oh, there's where I'm, kind of putting the thumb screws into it, right? And if I stop that and let myself be and trust that the contraction is probably something benign, and just needing to happen right now, like maybe it's the energies of the universe, and maybe it's what they call ascension flu, or maybe it's something in my deep unconscious that's working its way through. I don't have to say something is wrong. And when I can relax around it, and just allow that state of contraction to be as it is, then it has, much more flexibility and potentiality, of, like being able to expand when it's ready. When we're contracting against a contraction, then the natural expansion can't occur. So it's really useful, in our real everyday work if you can, think about it this way. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah, the trick is to not resist the contraction, I think. And for me, I just kind of look at it. I mean, or I look a little deeper into it and see what's going on there. I try to, at least that's my attempt. But of course, sometimes it catches me. But I'm getting better at that, acknowledging that the contraction or the downside, whatever you call it, is there's a purpose to it. Usually also there's an opportunity here somewhere, and if I can catch that, I can hold it a little easier.
Right. Yeah, and to bring to consciousness, what it might be is good, when we can. Sometimes, like we're doing that sort of from our forcing current or from our, you know, judgment a little bit. And so like it's good to just kind of open up and let it be as it is for a little while, and just kind of sit with it, and then out of that presencing to it, that's very neutral and very, benign, it begins to kind of open up and reveal itself, right? And then we can learn more about it. So I really love to just kind of, yeah, sort of with a, almost like, I guess, a, you know, what is that Buddhist prayer, of compassion, right? Sitting with whatever is there in that place. It says, your false idea that contraction is negative makes you misjudge one aspect of the threefold creative principle. You focus only on what is negative, which is often a most superficial aspect disconnected from the whole. This limited focusing eliminates the possibility to experiencing anything other than what you already see and believe. You lose sight of its regenerative benign nature and meaning. The same is true in reverse. For the expanding principle, you seldom recognize in a negative aggression the negative manifestation of the expansive movement. So, like there's this way in which when we're, I guess he's basically saying, we've got these images, about expansion and contraction, right? And then that eliminates the possibility of experiencing something other than, what we're already expecting, in that overgeneralization that we have. And in the, can, somebody wants to come in. We end up, allowing, uh, hi, Dora. Can you hear us? You with us? So welcome. We're just going through this lecture 235 of the Pathwork. Um, I don't know if you can unmute yourself and just say a word or something. How you're doing this evening, or how you found us, or what you know. But you're fine if you want to just be listening. Okay, so we were talking about sort of this image that contraction is negative and expansion is positive, and that whenever we're in an image, we're limiting the way that all of our options, and like I said, oftentimes he shows how instead of a right or a wrong, a good or a bad, kind of the dualistic, so expansion, contraction, one is good, one is bad, that actually there's a negative kind of expansion and a negative kind of contraction, and a positive kind of expansion and a positive kind of contraction. So, it allows us to differentiate a little more clearly and listen in a little more deeply to sort of the movements that are inside of us, so that we can make this determination. And he gave earlier in the lecture very clear, descriptions of the differences between them. So there are many overlapping, intermingling spiral movements within the manifestation of this principle. One level of your personality may need in any given phase of your development to expand. But for the expansion to be truly meaningful and cohesive with the overall plan, a simultaneous contraction on another level has to take place. This may seem complicated in the moment, but you will see that this is extremely important. If you do not fully give yourself in the most positive spirit to the contraction of one aspect of your personality, the expanding on the other level cannot be wholesome. The expanding movement can manifest harmoniously and in a meaningful pattern on one level only when the other level gives in to the contraction and derives most benefit from it. Not exactly sure what he's saying there. In some ways, does anybody want to give a shot at it? Anybody else? Um, he's saying that sort of on like for sort of a healthy expansion on one level, some other part needs to contract. Now I can see it kind of in time, like, I would think, well, I want my healthy expansion to come out of a grounded place. So I want to, come in and connect with myself first before I move out into expansion. So maybe that's what he's talking about. Um, it sounds a little more simultaneous in some ways. So maybe it's also, yeah, staying connected with one's inner, you know, place of uh, grounded, inwardness, while one is still expanding.
Is he saying that maybe that you can't really expand unless you have some contraction?
Well, and I think that again, in a time process, that's, absolutely true, right? And it's like, there is a kind of, pulsation that is part of the life force, and part of the breathing of life, and part of the breathing of everything, right? And the heartbeat of everything, right? It's all that kind of movement, and they rely on each other. But I don't know. It almost seems like he's saying that, like he's saying, like if we have to give up one thing in order to have the other, in some sense, maybe. Let me read it one more time. For the expansion to be truly meaningful and cohesive with the overall plan, a simultaneous contraction on another level has to take place. If you do not fully give yourself in the most positive spirit to the contraction of one aspect of your personality, the expanding on the other level cannot be wholesome. The expanding movement can manifest harmoniously and in a meaningful pattern on one level only when the other level, and I'm not sure what he's referring to in these levels, gives into the contraction and derives most benefit from it. Let's see if he explains it any more later. Until you have reached a certain state of self-awareness through the process of purification and transformation, you are totally unaware of this simultaneity of two levels, where on one level expansion, on the other level contraction exists. You only connect with the level that is most on the surface and ignore any other ongoing movement and reality within you. But as your consciousness increases, you become aware of this double and apparently contradictory manifestation. When this happens, it is indeed a wonderful awakening that indicates a connection with more levels of reality. It also means that you can perceive and trust these other levels, which makes the level of manifestation so much easier to deal with. It sheds a new light on everything you experience. A true balance will be established in this way. So intriguing, intimations there. I think I'm vaguely understanding, but, it may be also, something that is a place, that I've not experienced yet myself. And then maybe I haven't. I'm just not quite clear exactly what he's pointing to. The finger's pointing to the moon, right? It's hard sometimes to talk about these states. So he goes on, it's necessary, therefore, that you cease seeing your contractions as bad. You hinder yourself in that way. You blind yourself, and then you really make it into a negative manifestation. And that's true, that's that vicious circle, right? And that, contraction against the contraction. In this blindness, you contract about your contractions, as it were, and then it becomes a self-perpetuating contraction. And that, of course, is indeed undesirable and unwholesome. But when you derive the full meaning from your contracted state, it will no longer be a negative manifestation. So maybe that's a part of what he's talking about, right? It's like, and we've all experienced that, I think, that we've gone into contraction and penetrated it in some way, and recognized its value or its teaching or, its necessity and bringing us to a new understanding. It will be a harmonious ingathering in which something new prepares to come out of you, in which the receptive principle alternates with the active principle. Here is another idea for you. You think in terms of the active principle always being the active principle and the receptive principle always being the receptive principle. This is not so. What is on one level of manifestation, the active principle, must then reverse itself if it is to be harmonious and become the receptive principle, and vice versa. So this is like, the yin and the yang symbol, right? And the perpetual motion between the two of them in the figure eight we were describing before. And you sense the flow and the meaning and the spiral movement of the contraction and the expansion. Harmoniously, you will see what was in one moment and in one phase the outgoing, the active principle, actually becomes in the next moment the receptive one, and again, vice versa. This is then harmony, the harmony of life. Contraction is as necessary as expansion. It is part of the pulsatory movement that infiltrates all of life. Without this, creation cannot exist. I invite you, my friends, to sense deeply into yourself where and when and how is your contraction part of your creative process, how can you encourage it? How can you then utilize it for the next expanding moment? In some ways, I see COVID as sort of this, universal contraction thing that happened, and a larger collective manifestation of a contraction, right? And we're sort of in and out of it and sort of not complete, like the movement hasn't completed itself, it doesn't seem, or we're going into a, pattern kind of process of expanding and contracting within this, echoes of the original. But there's something, like that's coming out of the contraction, right? Like this whole transformation in our culture seems to be happening in many different levels. And again, not always all good, maybe, but it's like definitely everything is in flux and dynamism changing. So sense in yourself how both create and are necessary to unfold your innermost being. You want to bring out your innermost being, for it is the ultimate reality. So you want to go in and connect with your innermost being, and then you want to bring that out into the world. Many new levels of life experience will open themselves up to you as you proceed onto this path, as you follow the harmony of expanding and contracting and letting it ripen in between, and reaching out and reaching in, nourishing the reaching out from within and nourishing the reaching in from without. Oh, I like that. That might be what he's talking. This is the dance of life. Feel the reality and the music of these words, not so much in your intellect, but feel them in your deeper consciousness. As you train your positive will to no longer deny the courage to believe in the best in you and the best in life, so will you be carried by the larger force of that which is the ultimate you, that goes beyond the little intellect which you are so used to govern your precarious safety. Much greater safety comes when you have the courage to believe in the best, not with wishful thinking, not in fear of the bad, but in the strength that there is nothing in you that you cannot see and face and go through, that there is only light at the end of such tunnels. As you do this increasingly, you will see that what seems like a negative manifestation is the blessing of the next level that swims to the surface. So and then he gives the force and does a Q&A. So let's go ahead and pause there for this evening. I think that lecture, even though short, stands well on its own and is kind of inspiration. Beautiful lecture. So
What kept coming to my mind was like a creative process, so to speak, and then the release of the creative process. Like, for instance, I might spend a lot of time learning how to play a song with the anticipation that eventually one day I'm going to play that song in front of a group of people and inspire them in some way, hopefully, or entertain them at the least entertain them, So the learning of the song might be the contraction, and the performing of the song might be the expansion.
yeah, and I don't know, somehow when I was reading this, I was also thinking even of kind of, like the current even place with, the business or the way that there's some kind of, contraction in your capacity or in the way that flow used to come to you, and maybe there's something wrong with that, or, like, or maybe there's some way that you're contracting against that contraction that is then blocking, something new to emerge, or just allowing maybe this time to contract even more fully for a little while. Maybe there's something, a deeper connection within yourself.
Yeah. Well, there's a resistance against being competitive right now. the business lends itself to a very competitive, action. And I think my psyche, my personality is like tired of that. And, and there's this part of me that realizes that, well, if I'm not willing to be competitive in my action, then I better be willing to suffer the consequences of that, which means not getting, not getting anything to sell, not making a profit, not being successful at the business anymore. It's hard. I mean, I was used to be very competitive in my business. I was get up very early and be like, the early bird, so to speak, on the scene to get the deal. And I'm just not
So
willing to do that anymore.
yeah. And and maybe that's not a bad thing, or maybe there's some kind of a break in that's that part of the story, right? Maybe there's what I'm hearing kind of is as a prayer in that, like this prayer that says, okay, like, so this isn't working for me anymore. I really don't want to, commit, and take that, inner active sort of thing, because my heart's not in it, right? Or
Right.
something's in it, right? And so, like either, help me see where I'm, find something that my heart can be in
Mm,
that, you know, help me, or help me find another way. Maybe there's, I mean, who knows? I mean, I think in general the whole world is open for revisioning right now, right? So maybe there's another way to do the work you were doing and drop off the competitiveness. Now I get that, practically that doesn't seem realistic at this point, but maybe in prayer, maybe with the spiritual help, there's a new model or a new way to do that would come to you with, so
yeah. Yeah.
it's kind of like opening up that sort of unknown, that not knowing, that creative emptiness, right, place, and allowing that contraction, that's happening just because of the way things are in the world and the way you are right now, to be trustworthy and just kind of see where it leads, right?
Mm.
Not try to fight it or judge it. So, anything else?
Well, the only thing that comes up when Frank was talking for me was that my investments. I'm invested in my investments, my financial investments, and I have to be really on top of them to make profit. And, da, 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 da. And part of me doesn't want to worry, be in that drive of. It's not a heavy worry, but it's there. It's there's a non-trust there somewhere that I would like to either look at, peel open, or I don't know, have some new awareness. It's not overly heavy, but it's. I would like to have a bigger trust in the bigger picture of the universe, or the whole picture of survival and money. How the attachment is connected there. So anyway, I just want to bring it up. Frank is kind of reminding me my game of business is essentially now playing with the money. When I had some rental property, I didn't worry so much. But now that I don't have that, it's because I sold it. It's like, well, now I got way too much over here, and I don't know if that's intuition or if that's reality, or I don't know.
And that's part of the study of it, right? Is there, like it may be reality, but it sounds like there's also sort of a negative contraction in there, or fear-based, and so the action is coming out of the fear or the worry or the contracted state, right? It's more contracted than you were before when you had, income coming from the rentals or whatever. You can feel, more contraction.
Yeah, yeah, good way to put it. Yeah, the fear is definitely up versus before. So I'm just kind of bringing it up to consciousness, actually. Yeah.
It's true, clearly, on the collective that you just, we're all, like, okay, so, how do we, get the root chakra level of things, the survival, the economy, the foundation for survival on this planet without killing our planet and without, it's like one of the biggest, deepest questions we're all dealing with in many different ways. So, and we have to allow ourselves to be human, right? And do it the way we do it. We can't kind of think, well, I'm bad for doing it that way. I should do it. So, we have to learn our way by, doing the best we can in each circumstance, right? So you'll do that until you get, really fed up with that feeling of contraction, or, maybe by talking about it and becoming aware of it again, you can, call some light to it and deepen, your faith, somehow, or, or allow that kind of, it's a good day to die sort of place where we can, like, there's no ultimate security kind of on that material level anywhere, anytime, right? So it's a kind of illusion all the way around.
Kind of a stressful spiral, chasing after the dollar, paying attention to financial markets and your investments every day, day in and day out. It's like a stressful spiral, you know? If you're on that, if you're doing that, if you're like trading or thinking, okay, now I need to find the next bet, the next good stock buy or something like that.
Yeah, part of it's interesting. Is part of it's kind of fun, and then part of it's a stress. So it's a mixed bag. But my biggest game or trick is to bring it up to awareness, bring it up to consciousness, and then the field is open. But if I hide it or try to pretend it's not there or try to mentally override it, that is the kiss of death. It never works. So right now I'm just going to bring it up to the light and bring it up to, and money too is such a crazy thing, especially in the Western culture. Well, probably all over the world, but it can really affect other people's psyche. And so, and I get into this comparison thing, but I just want to be aware of it. I just want to hold it because I know on a deeper level, it's not real. It's a false game of security, and there's the deeper game is what I'm after, But I got
That's
this fighting around now.
And I think that's beautiful. And it's all we can, like being in that state of just self-recognition, a 50-50, and it's like that's the work that we have to do. And then that brings us to a place where it's possible for, spirit and inspiration and wisdom and other things to start coming in, right? And guiding us and everything. But we really do have to be in that, place of, you know, commitment, like he says, giving our best, willing to, take the next step, but, like not trying to jump over ourselves, being where we are, and just, asking the question with each step, here's my prayer now, right? And seek that guidance and spiritual support and help. I think that there's really a way that part of the ego thinks that it's supposed to do it all itself all the time too, and so that kind of humbles that a little more too, to ask and to go into partnership with the higher self in a way, right? Is sort of
I
the
like
goal.
that.
Yeah. Okay. All right, everybody. Good.
Thank you, Darlene.
Uh,
Again.
Thank you. Thanks, Darlene. It's a heavy lecture, but it's good. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Good night.
Night.